Hi, and welcome to a new episode of Conscious Curiosity, a podcast that is simple and complex at the same time. It's simple in that we investigate what consciousness means to various people and what curiosity does in terms of supporting your place in the world, and the intersection of those two, consciousness and curiosity. In this episode, we are with Kari Siegel, who is a Feldenkrais practitioner, a dancer, and an occupational therapist based in Michigan in the United States of America. And in our conversation, we're going to talk about how paying attention to movement in the body can both support and influence the way you can pay attention to movement in your mind. And second to that, I just said body and mind as though they're two separate things. And as you'll hear from Kari, it's a unfair or improper distinction to separate those two. And it's more important to look at ourself as a whole, as body, heart, and mind. And so please sit back and enjoy. And as usual, if you have any suggestions, any ideas of what you would like to see on this podcast series, please let me know, and I'll do my best to satisfy. Here we are with Kari Siegel. So Kari, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy that you asked.
Yeah, thank you so much. You and I have known each other for a number of years.
Yes.
But our audience doesn't know you. All they know is that you're an occupational therapist and a Feldenkrais practitioner, licensed in the state of Michigan in the United States of America.
Yes, where I was never really eager or wanting or planning to live, and lo and behold, here I am. I was very happy. I'm a proud Canadian.
You're a proud Canadian. Were you born in Canada?
I was actually born in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Right.
And we moved to Toronto when I was 2, and I grew up in Toronto.
Uh-huh. Did you go back to visit?
I went back once when I was 8 to visit with my parents, and that was it. I've never been again. I'd love to go. My parents would love to take us, but we only went the one time.
And at age 8, do you remember any of that trip?
I remember my grandmother's apartment in Johannesburg. I remember my grandfather, who that was the last time I saw him. That's it. I don't remember more of the visit. It was a 3-week visit, and I don't remember anything other than the apartment.
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately.
Still, it sounds like it's a nice memory, just that.
Well, I feel very identified as part of the South African Jewish community. It's a cool community to be part of. So I hold on to that. It's a strong part of my identity. I grew up, all my parents' friends were South African. I have a lot of friends whose parents were South African, came over around the same time we did. So it's a strong part of my identity for sure. And my parents have gone to visit and send us a lot of amazing pictures. And so I feel connected to it in that way.
Uh-huh. And you eat things like biltong and...
Definitely. I love biltong. Have you had it?
No, I would go for mango biltong, but I'm a vegetarian, so.
Oh, okay. Then you won't be eating biltong. It's delish, but not if you're a vegetarian.
No. So what would you say, like when you say you hold on to that identity, like what, and you're an immigrant, even though you came at age 2.
Yeah.
What does that mean for you? Like what is the identity that you hold on to?
Well, I think a big part of it is the people. I feel like my parents' friends were really our extended family growing up, because they were all immigrants together.
So kind of like aunts and uncles.
The family friends were very close. They were like aunts and uncles for sure.
Yeah.
And I think there's certain mitos, certain character traits that I think South Africans, if I could generalize, seem to have that I feel proud of. I think that well, the Jewish community I think it was all Orthodox. They didn't really have Reform and Conservative, but they didn't necessarily keep kosher and Shomer Shabbat. But there's a very, very strong Jewish identity, very strong sense of community, of people helping each other, to settle initially in South Africa in whatever year or century people came. And then when people left South Africa and went to different communities, so the Toronto community is a very large South African community, and it's connected. They helped each other settle. They helped each other raise each other's kids and be in a community together. And there's so I was talking about the character traits. I think there's a kindness and an openness and propriety, like that British influence.
Yeah.
You know, my grandmother lived to be almost 102, Kanainahara.
Wow.
And she lost her sight, and she had polio, and she had all sorts of health issues. And at the end of her life, when she was, you know, she had this incredible politeness, this incredible manners that I just thought was so sweet. There's a very ingrained sense of just interacting in a very kind, polite, caring, nice way with other people.
Nice. That's beautiful. It sounds like that's a piece of your grandmother that is in you.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. So fast forwarding a little bit, you're now in Michigan.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Where the Michiganers are, as Rabbi Skobach would say.
Uh-huh. So a Meshuggah for our audience is a crazy person, right?
Right. It's a play on the word Michigan.
Yeah. 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 And are you a little crazy?
For living in Michigan? I think so.
Oh.
No, I don't think the craziness comes from Michigan. I can't blame that. I think
No,
it came from Toronto probably, or
right.
maybe South Africa.
Uh-huh. So the reason I was looking forward to you coming onto this show is because I know that you're a Feldenkrais practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know very much about Feldenkrais, but I really want to study it.
Great.
So I'm not having you here to start teaching me now, but I have a big curiosity about it.
Great.
I wonder if you could start by maybe telling our audience a little bit about Moshe Feldenkrais and like about what it is, and then maybe how you came to it.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask you a question first?
Yeah, please. Okay? Yeah, of course.
So where did your interest in it stem from, and how have you heard of it?
Yeah, so my interest is I'm an embodied relational therapist. My modalities are Gestalt therapy primarily, and then somatic experiencing, which is Peter Levine's trauma therapy. Both of those modalities are very body-based. So this, I think of them as like bottom up. So as opposed to starting with cognition and figuring out how do I change my thinking, I start in the body and move up to integrate body, heart, and mind. So I did a lot of body work, and I've been doing yoga since like the late 80s, mid 80s. And I just have this fascination with how the body speaks to the rest of myself. And I know that Feldenkrais, the Feldenkrais Center in Toronto was literally down the hall from the yoga studio that I used to go.
Yes, Esther Myers, right?
Esther Myers yoga studio, right.
Yes.
So I find as a therapist, I sit a lot, and I see that when I sit and sit and sit, I find the changes, like I dull myself. And I know that Feldenkrais is a lot about movement. So I'm just curious, like that's where my interest is. I think movement is the place for me to keep unlocking my creativity and my growth.
Right. Great. That's amazing that you know that. It's interesting because Feldenkrais is incredibly effective for people that also have very limited movement. People that might even be paralyzed and can't move can tremendously benefit from Feldenkrais, which is fascinating to me. So in that sense, yes, it's about movement, and I come to it because I spent my life training in dance and all styles of dance, and then most recently I trained formally in modern dance, modern technique. And I had a very bad back injury that flattened me for a number of days. And I went for physical therapy, traditional therapy, and nothing worked. And I was studying, I was doing a degree in philosophy at the time. I've always been a dancer and
Uh-huh.
a
And the
thinker.
philosophy.
So my philosophy professor mentioned this Feldenkrais method, and he had these lessons on tape that I started doing. And they freed up my back in a way that nothing I had ever done. So it was very effective for my injury rehabilitation. And then I decided to become a practitioner. So because I came to it from dance, yes, it is a whole movement study. And then I came to learn it's actually more about awareness, like you were saying, cognitive awareness. And the body is like a vehicle to that, but it's not a requirement. So in that sense, people, like I said, who have movement limitations or who have paralysis can still benefit tremendously.
Mm. So
So
can you say a little bit more about that? So the
yeah,
body is a vehicle to awareness or to
right.
cognition, or
So I mean, as an occupational therapist, I have to explain myself in very clinical terms that I might not necessarily use when I'm just working as a Feldenkrais practitioner.
okay.
As an occupational therapist, I would describe it as a method of neural muscular re-education. So it's refining that communication from the brain to the body, neural muscular,
Mm-hmm.
and the awareness we have when we do that. So the fact that you're aware that you sit so much, and that even though you sit a lot, there's a way to sit that can lead to tremendous amount of stiffness and discomfort and loss of range of motion. And there's also ways to sit that we can be aware of how we're sitting and aware of how much movement possibility there is even while you're sitting. And that awareness is what can create more movement, more range of motion, more possibility for expression through the body. And that loops back to more self-awareness.
Uh-huh. I like that.
Um,
I I, I like it because it sounds like it kind of sounds like the path of therapy as well, which is building awareness in a way that it leads to greater choice in your life.
exactly,
And
exactly,
that greater choice gives you more vitality in your life.
exactly. So what Feldenkrais would say, not that I can quote him, but something like, when we have, like you said, possibilities for choice in our movements, and
Mm-hmm.
we become aware of our habits of movement, we become aware of the possibilities of choice in our life in general. And it generalizes to becoming more aware of our habits in general, habits that are helping us and habits that are maybe not helping us. So when I see somebody who comes to me because of pain, or like I started with back pain, what am I doing habitually in my life that led to this back pain? And to become aware of that, and the micro movements that are habitual, and the macro, bigger movements that are habitual. And the more awareness I have of that, the more I have choices to choose something different, which generalizes into a sense of freedom and a sense of uh, increased choices in my life, in a
Right.
cognitive way, not just a physical way, because it's works in a way that engages the brain. So that concept of choice, that idea of choice is in there, even though I'm just practicing it physically.
Right. I think that's beautiful. That's that kind of flow back and forth from the microcosm to the macro, or
Right,
not cosm, but to the micro, looking at my muscular movement can inform the macro, which is this is how I am in the whole world.
right.
Yeah.
And there's not even a mind body distinction. It's I'm one person. My mind and my body are engaged in everything I do. There's no such thing as not, as long as I'm alive, something in me is always moving. Even if it's just my muscles between my rib cages as I breathe in and out, they're always moving. Even
Hmm.
when I'm asleep, even if someone is paralyzed, even there's always something moving in a living body. And the more smaller and smaller and more specific awareness we have of that, the more our sense of awareness generalizes and our whole life. Yes.
Nice. You just said something else that I think is super important about movement. Right? That a lot of clients come to me because they feel stuck, and I would imagine in the Feldenkrais world, if you can show that their body is in constant movement when they think it's stuck,
Yeah,
then it could open the door to them believing that they can actually unstick themselves
exactly.
from their
Exactly.
from their life problems or whatever.
Right. And that's why it's so like you're training now
Experiencing.
in somatic experiencing, that is going to link a person back to their psychology and
Mm-hmm.
how they perceive themselves. Moshe Feldenkrais talked a lot about self-image. We act according to our self-image. If
Uh-huh.
I think that I'm stuck, I'm stuck. If I have an experience of tremendous movement and mobility and not being stuck, even if it's just an experience in my body, it's an experience of freedom, and it can be generalized the more we pay attention to it.
Huh. That's neat. Do you think like his history, do you think he was stuck and then he somehow got unstuck through his own Feldenkrais like model? Because wasn't he a physicist or a
He was a
neurophysicist? Or,
physicist
he was a
and he was
physicist.
an athlete. Yes, he was a physicist, and he was a soccer player, and he was a judo master.
Uh-huh.
Um, and he was very involved in the world of physical development, and he had a knee injury, and he was told by doctors that he would need surgery and he probably wouldn't walk or play soccer again. And he, being the inquisitive mind that he was, he started to investigate how he moved, because there were times when his knee hurt and his knee bothered him, and there were other times it didn't. And why was that? So he did his own study of his own movement and realized that there's always auxiliary movements. There's always antecedent movements that get us ready for movement. And if we can be aware at that level, like even as I initiate movement, am I doing something? Am I leaning more to one side? Am I protecting one side? Am I avoiding one side? Am I using my whole body, or am I only using my right side or only my left side? Am I putting too much pressure on my knees and not using my feet or my hips or my range of motion in my shoulders or my neck? He paid attention to where the movement was and where it wasn't. And that's how his method developed, was by these
Right.
very small awarenesses of his movement
Huh.
patterns. And he avoided surgery. He was able to rehabilitate himself with that tremendous awareness.
So that story leads me to a question about, I don't know if you know this. I mean, if you could answer it, but I studied a little bit the Alexander technique,
Mm-hmm.
mostly to help me sit in my chair as a therapist and be as present as I can be with a client. But Alexander had the same kind of, seems like a similar story. Like
Yes, I think they
he lost his
were.
voice. He lost his voice, right? He was Australian, lost his voice. I think went to England and then developed his own technique of regaining his voice through watching the minute changes in his body.
Yes, there are a lot of overlaps. They're both about awareness. They're both about neuromuscular repatterning to create better habits of movement and better habits of self-use.
Hmm.
And I
And
believe that they were contemporaries, Alexander and Feldenkrais, if I'm not mistaken about the timeline when they were around.
yeah,
I'd have to double check that, but I think that there's a lot of overlaps. There's other methods as well in this area of awareness.
hmm.
And an early person in the movement of somatics and dance was Mabel Todd, who wrote a book called The Thinking Body. And this idea that our body knows better than we do,
Right.
in a way. So it's like, they use a lot of this type of stuff in sports training. So if a basketball player wants to get a basket, if he just focuses on the basket, he's more likely to get it in the basket. If he's paying too much attention to exactly what to do, he's not going to get the basket. But if he's got this larger image of what he's trying to accomplish, he's going to get it in there. And then he can break down and become more refined and more aware of the steps along the way. But this idea of paying attention to our body what our body does without us trying to make it do anything, is where there's a tremendous amount of wisdom to be learned from the body, and where there's this huge field in the area of somatics and dance and movement training of there's a lot of different practitioners that use these types of concepts of paying attention and awareness, and that our body can teach us.
Right. Our body can teach us. And I wonder if you could like analyze me for a moment. Because as you were saying that, I was just thinking about when I run. So sometimes I would feel like my calf or shin really tighten up. And then I'd go up to my head and I'd say, Modi, you've got to stop running because you're going to hurt yourself a lot quickly. And then instead of doing that, I would actually expand my awareness. Instead of going to that one point and trying to focus on it and say, can I relax the muscle or whatever, I actually would include my entire body. So I'd have awareness of my whole body. And within 15, 20 seconds, the tightness in my shin or whatever it was would just disappear.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Good for you.
How did that work? Like how?
What I think is happening when you do something like that is you are bringing awareness to the rest of your body, and you are thereby distributing the effort, which is reducing the effort at one particular point. And so the injury or the pain at that one point dissipates. That's a lot of what injury is overuse at one joint in the body, right? And if we develop and practice and strengthen our awareness of the many multiple joints throughout our whole body, down to my little pinky and my little toe, I'm distributing the effort through the whole machine, so to speak. Right. And then that one joint is not as stressed. And that's why you reduced your pain by doing that. Huh. That's very cool. Good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's the way. That's the way to do it, because most people think, oh, I have a sore shin, I have shin splints, or I have a tight calf, or I have a stiff ankle, I can't run, until it heals. And that's, in my experience as an occupational therapist working with people with physical injuries and physical disabilities and pain and post-surgery, that is not the way, that is not the best way to heal. That is an acute healing that needs to happen. But unless we learn to redistribute that effort, and you become more aware of how your whole body can work as a unit, then you're going to keep having recurrent injury until you learn to distribute the effort.
Nice. Which then brings me up to my head, where I have this recurring thought, negative thought, let's say, about, oh, my friend just did this to me, and then I'm in this loop.
Yes.
And it's almost like the same technique is required. I've got to redistribute that energy so that I'm not only thinking about how my friend hurt me or
exactly.
Whatever.
Exactly. And this is using the tools of the nervous system, of the body, of the brain. And remember, the brain is in the body. The nervous system goes through the whole body. It's not just up here. My brain's not just up here. Mm-hmm. The nerves that go through my body are part of the brain, are part of the nervous system. So the brain is in the body.
Which is a bit why, I don't know if you know Bessel van der Kolk, one of like a big trauma therapy.
I might have heard the name. Yes, I've heard the name.
His book is called The Body Keeps the Score, which I think is like this brilliant title about how it is possible to pay attention to the body to learn about the brain.
Exactly.
As opposed to use the brain to learn about the brain. Or in addition, in addition to.
All these things all work together.
Yeah.
They really do. And the more we use them, the more expansive we are in our sense of self, in our self-awareness, and what tools we have access to use when we're stuck, either cognitively or physically.
Right. Cool. If I can ask you another sort of academic question, then before, not in this call, but before when we spoke, you talked about proprioception and interoception. And can you explain what those are and how they fit into what we're talking about?
So proprioception is awareness of our body in space. So I know that my right pinky is behind me. I don't need to see it. I just know it's there. I have a proprioceptive sense. Interoception is an awareness of the inner workings of my body, and a very basic level of that is I know when I need to go to the bathroom. I know if I'm too hot or too cold. I know if I have, and then you mentioned nociception, which is a sense of pain,
Mm-hmm.
and how we adjust to these things. If I'm feeling, if I have to go to the bathroom, I go to the bathroom. I have a sense of that. If I'm feeling hot, I can take off a layer or I can turn off a fan. So I respond to these internal awarenesses. So interoception is that internal sense, and proprioception is external sense of my limbs and space.
Hmm. And how do you get your clients to use those concepts?
That's a great question. A lot of it is practice. People not even realizing that they don't have good proprioception. I have worked with people that have a challenge of knowing like that they like. I'm sorry to keep using this example, but it's a very like relevant example. This one woman told me that, you know, there's certain times, certain things she does in her day where she'll unlock the door to go into her house and she has to use the bathroom right away. She can't get there in time. So it's her teaching her to pay attention to those internal cues is a lot of practice, a lot of self-awareness. Proprioception is a little bit of an easier one for me to teach somebody because it's external, it's easier to move than that subtle internal sense. Proprioception can be enhanced and refined the more we use it, the more we're drawn to the awareness of it. So I do hands-on work with people, a little bit harder during COVID, but I also just do verbal instruction where I'll say to them, like, can you become aware of the back of your left shoulder blade? You realize it's there. Can you just start to move it? Let's just start by moving it right and left. So you notice that you can do that. You're not just moving the top of your shoulder or the front of your shoulder, which we're used to, but your shoulder blade behind you is also moving. I'll show them a skeleton. I'll show them how a shoulder blade can move. If there's hands on, then it's even more of an enhanced sense that they have. So it's a lot of practice and awareness. That's how we improve anything, and that's how we can improve proprioception.
Nice. So it's a bit like bringing blind spots. Like I
Yes.
just had a somatic experiencing session where I was the client, and the therapist was actually a Feldenkrais practitioner
Oh,
who's now training on the west coast of the US in
amazing.
Oregon. Yeah. And so at one point, I felt a lot of tightness in my right shoulder. And she said, "What do you notice in your left shoulder?" I was like, "Nothing. I don't really feel my left shoulder." And so instead of working with the tightness in my right shoulder, she just actually went straight to the left to bring it online, essentially, like to recognize, like to do what you just said, like, can I move it forward a bit, back a bit? Like,
Right.
can I bring it into more awareness because it wasn't?
Exactly. And let's work with the shoulder that's not, you know, in the spotlight right now. That's not being defensive, maybe. You
Yeah.
know, sometimes when there's pain, well, usually almost always when there's pain, there's defensiveness, there's muscular tension that develops to protect. So I don't want to touch your right shoulder right away if that's the one that's hurting, but I can do a lot with the left shoulder. And because of our brilliant brain, they teach each other. They're constantly teaching each other the two sides. So that's a very, that's effective method. And it connects to what you said about running. When you expanded your awareness, it also minimized the pain. So when I help a person realize that their right shoulder being stuck, let's see if we can loosen up that left shoulder, but also the rib cage and even the pelvis and other parts along that incredibly mobile spine. Suddenly you start to notice that there is movement elsewhere, and next thing you know, your right shoulder is moving more.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of it is dissipating that awareness elsewhere and knowing how to come back and forth between the spotlighted piece and the everything else.
Nice. So are you a magician then?
No, but if many people have said that that's the reaction I get a lot of the time is like, it's magic. And how did you do that? And first of all, I didn't do it. You did it. I just asked you certain questions. I brought your awareness to certain things. I reminded you that there's more to your body than just the pain in your right shoulder. A lot of what you do probably as a therapist is reminding a person of who they are, not only this one part that's, you know, the red light.
Right. Beautiful. Is there is there a place in your work for emotional work?
It's a very good question because it often comes up. Often people are holding tremendous physical tension, and when there's a release, there's a very, very big emotional release. Or they are holding something in their body as a response to an emotional situation, and they're not ready to let it go. And I have to be sensitive to those cues. A person might not want to relieve the tension. They're coming to me because they're having pain, but they're not ready to let go of whatever they are holding on to. And I have to be sensitive to that, and not, if I'm pushing them, it's not going to work. It has to be so gentle and so sort of indirect in order for it to be received. I can't come too directly at somebody. However, sometimes I do have to come directly at somebody. Sometimes that is what's called for. Sometimes that is the only way they're going to move. And either that will threaten them and they won't ever want to come back to me, or it will open something in them that they are willing to have happen. And then if there's an emotional or psychological result, I have to know my my scope of practice, which is that I'm not a trained therapist or psychotherapist in any way. I'm a compassionate person, and I have skills as a person, and I can process to a very, very small extent, and I keep it focused on what they came to me for, which is a physical experience. And I will refer them to a therapist or psychotherapist of some sort if I can see that this is a big thing that needs to be processed more than what's in my scope of practice. So I can't go too deep psychologically with a person, because I just don't feel I have the training to do that. But it's remarkable what I can and will process with somebody if they are willing and feel safe with me, and we can do it to a certain extent. Does that answer the question, or is that just fuzzy?
Yeah, no, I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think my question sort of came out of where emotions actually sit, both in the body and in the process. Like, there are different theories about how emotions get constructed, whether the mind constructs the emotion and then it gets exhibited through the body, or whether the emotion is constructed in a different way. And it just seems like you'd said earlier about the separation of body and mind. And I think about that, especially during COVID times, that we're so diligent about the physical safety of our bodies, and we almost are ignoring the mental the requirements for mental health. So we have people locked in bedrooms for 14 days, and it's like we have seniors, who are alone, suffering, and we just think, okay, so long as you're physically safe, it's great. So I always just wonder about, in terms of consciousness, like where body, mind, and then the emotions sort of in between kind of fit together and play with each other.
And I think what I hope I express clearly a little bit back is that there's not really a distinction between body and mind.
Mm.
The brain, which I think is where the mind resides, if you want to say that, is in the body. The nervous system is an extension of the brain through all the limbs. So I don't think they can be separated. And I think that physical isolation is directly resulting in emotional, mental manifestations. And I know myself, if I don't move, I feel bad. And when I do move, I feel good. Like, it's a very simple correlation. I don't think it's just because I grew up dancing and moving. I think it's just a human condition that it's essential that we keep moving. It's essential for our mental health that we keep moving. Even if your daughter's in her bedroom, I hope that she can put on some music and dance, or do some yoga, or whatever the many things is I'm sure you have in your home for teaching your children, the importance of that. And I love working with seniors for that reason, because just a little bit of movement, they just see how much it helps them. That being said, I've also worked with people that can't move, and I can still give them a feeling in their body that is positive, a feeling of freedom of movement in their body, even if they are very constricted. Because even just a little bit of movement when you're feeling so constricted can be an experience of freedom.
That's really interesting. I get that at an abstract level. Can you, like, what does it give them? Like when you say freedom, does it free them into like joy or acceptance?
Yeah, it can. I mean, I've worked with people in nursing homes that are lying on their back and they're just looking at the ceiling all day. And I'll sit on that side of them and they'll just look at me with their eyes. Like they're scared to move or they think they can't move. And I'll say, you could move your head. You could, and they don't even realize they can. And then they move their head and they're like, whoa, I didn't even know I could do that. I bet you could roll your shoulders too. And suddenly they have, look at this. They don't just have this in their world. They have this in their world. They can see their neighbor, they can see the other staff, they can see the outside, they can see the flowers. They can breathe better because they're not constricting their muscles in their neck. So it's tremendous what a person can gain just from a little bit of movement.
That's amazing.
And there's so much internal, like physiological that happens. Like I said, the breath can expand when there's less muscular tension, and just the power of that self-image, the power of my world is only this big versus the power of my world is this big. It's a tremendous change in self-image and self-consciousness.
Right. And I hear how gentle and compassionate you are with that, because it's one thing to say, you think your world is really that small. I'm telling you it's big, as opposed to having them experience that it can be big.
It's the only way. We know this as therapists, physical therapist, occupational therapist, psychotherapist, but we also know this as people, even if people maybe don't say it explicitly. Telling somebody something doesn't really help them. Having skills to have them experience it themselves is really the only way people absorb information and create any kind of change.
Right.
And that's the hardest thing about parenting. Or any relationship, right? Where you're trying to teach something, there's certain methods of teaching that are totally ineffective and others that are effective.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think I seem to find a lot of the ones that are ineffective.
That one's not very effective.
Yeah. Is there anything else that we should talk about?
Well, I'm curious what you said your podcast is called Conscious Curiosity.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the title of your podcast.
Yes.
Is it called Conscious Curiosity?
Conscious Curiosity. Right.
That's a brilliant name. What does that mean to you?
It's a good question. So the curiosity piece, I think, is easier for me. I would look at all these, like your grandmother, like these 100-plus-year-old people, right? And the newscaster always goes over to the nursing home or to their home and says, what was the secret to your longevity? Right? And they say, I never smoked a day in my life. I never had a drink, right? Or the next person says, oh, I smoke a pack a day and I have, for 70 years, right? Like everyone's got a different thing. And so I would watch those and I said, well, what do I think, if I'm granted a long life, what do I think my prescription for longevity is? And I came up with curiosity, that so long as I stay curious in this world,
Yes.
like so long as I keep my eyes open to search for truth,
yes,
and not have my ego get in the way and frame the world in only one way, but just kind of keep it vast and expansive, that I'll live not just a long life, but a quality long life.
yes,
So that's the curiosity piece.
yes.
And then the consciousness is, I'm just really interested in hearing what people think consciousness is, with a view to ultimately understanding, given that definition of consciousness, how am I in this world? So kind of an existential question about how does my belief around consciousness impact how I feel I am in the world.
It's great. And can I just try to find a book?
Absolutely.
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
Shoot, it's unfortunately it's on a bookshelf that I don't have access to right now. It was my Feldenkrais books. He's written a number of books. One is called Awareness Through Movement. And somewhere in there, he says something like the most important human quality is curiosity. That is, like you said, what gives us a long, meaningful life is being curious. And again, this concept that I can be like if I think my world is like this, can I be curious about that? Is it just limited to that? Or can I turn my head a little bit more? Or there's pain over here, but what if I move over here? Is there pain here? No. What about here? No. Oh, look at all these parts that there isn't pain. So that concept of curiosity and how that can be generalized and applicable to so many things that we do.
Right. And also, I think it's just very non-judgmental. It's not pushing you into anything. It's not saying you should be a certain way. It's just being curious.
Being curious
about what is.
Yes. That's great. I'm surprised a podcast called Conscious Curiosity doesn't already exist, because it's just such a perfect title.
Kari, it does exist.
I mean, before you.
Oh.
I mean, before you
I know.
grabbed it. I hope you got the domain name. ConsciousCuriosity.ca.
I got .ca. I couldn't get .com.
Right.
But I have a hyphen. I have a
I know what you mean.
So Kari, this has been wonderful spending time with you and learning about like the way you see the world, the way you understand consciousness from your perspective in life and from your training in Feldenkrais. And it's been really special for me.
It's been outstanding. Thank you so much for asking me to join you. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Before you do go though, I if it's okay with you, I'd like to ask you, like I ask all my guests, 3 questions.
Okay.
And you can answer yes, no, you can pontificate, you can talk for an hour, whatever. So the first question is, what is your superpower?
I think that my superpower is optimism and the deep belief that everyone is incredibly amazing.
Beautiful. Thank you. Nice. The second question is, if you're reading a book right now, what are you reading?
I'm reading a lot of parenting books. I'm reading a lot of parenting books right now.
Okay. Do you have one you recommend?
One that's on my shelf that I want to start reading. It's called The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel, which happens to be my son's name. But he's not the doctor that wrote the book.
Do you want him to be a doctor?
Listen, I'm a Jewish mother. What can I say? No, whatever my children do that keep them in touch with themselves and what they feel are their superpowers, I am. That's all I can ask for. That's so great. that parenting book looks very good. And again, this concept of the whole brain child. So addressing the right-sidedness of us, which is where the more emotions are, and creativity and expansive thinking and abstract relating, and then the left brain where there needs to be, constraints and rules and directions. So learning to parent from 2 sides of the brain is a goal.
Nice. Beautiful. Okay. And the last question is, I have this book of questions. It's called Ever Wonder? Ask questions and live into the answers. So cool. I'm gonna flip through the book and you say stop. There's a different question on every page.
Okay. Stop.
Okay, here's the question. How do you nurture your soul?
I am building a dance studio in my basement for myself.
What?
And I hope to offer dance and movement classes to my community, but really it's because it's a need of mine. I feel very much that I am a dancer and I am a mover, and I need space to do that in my own home, not just that I go to. But so I am in the process of creating that, and that really nurtures my soul.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Someone asked me a few years ago if I ever have dance parties. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they were like, well, you just like dance by
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah.
So I came home and it was the middle of the day. And I didn't want the neighbors to look through the windows. So, but I pulled all the curtains closed. I put some music on that I love,
That's amazing.
and just danced and danced.
Yes.
And it was just so liberating.
It's so liberating. It's such a freedom. And I also spent my life training in dance and the technique and the hard work. So not just the freedom and the liberation of putting music on and dancing like no one's watching, which is
Right.
absolutely liberating. But for me, it's always been a place of hard work and focus and developing technique and developing concentration and commitment. So it really satisfies a lot of those things for me. And my children are movers, my children are ninjas. So we need a space for them to be ninjas.
Awesome.
They'll be able to use it too.
Right. That's great. So they're becoming that'll be their superpower, a ninja
Yeah.
superpower. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we need to give our kids space to be
Right.
whatever they are.
Beautiful. That's a great.
I feel like this podcast is just, there's just so much possibility, conscious curiosity. The possibilities of conscious curiosity are endless. I hate to even end because there's just so much more to say.
Oh, good. Well, that's a great way to leave it, because that means you can come back in the future.
I'd love to, and I look forward to hearing your other guests, because there really is just so much more to say. And I think it's amazing that you're combining psychotherapy with your somatic training, because that's where it's at.
Yeah.
That's where it's at.
Great. Thank you for that public testimonial or
Yeah,
the marketing push or whatever.
sure.
Yeah.
That's where it's at. Yeah.
And you too. And you too. Thank you for doing all your work in Michigan.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. We'll sign off.
Thank you so much for having me, Mojo.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Good luck with this.
Okay. Take care.